Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. 2 months went by in the blink of an eye. As time passed, the 300-meter-tall pill furnaces gradually began to turn crimson and emanate shocking levels of heat. However, Bai Xiaochun still wasn't completely satisfied and would often add more earth flamestones. To ensure that he got the best results possible, he even went to Bai Lin and asked if any top experts were available who could bless the flames. Bai Lin and Bai Xiaochun were on completely the same train of thought when it came to those 10 huge furnaces, so Bai Lin didn't even hesitate for a moment before agreeing to his request. In fact, Bai Lin personally went to seal the pill furnaces and then had 10 of his subordinates who were nascent soul cultivators come and converge nascent soul flames from their cultivation bases to help heat up the furnaces. When Bai Xiaochun went out every day and saw 10 nascent soul cultivators looking almost like living earth flame stones, he couldn't help but anticipate the results. I wonder what these things are going to end up doing. Eventually, he was forced to simply suppress his curiosity and wait. During the 2 months which passed, he produced batch after batch of soul convergence pills. In fact, he quickly reached the point where he was concocting more than 10,000 per day. Zhao Long and the others would collect the completed pills, after which Bai Xiaochun would use his command medallion, which was connected to the pagoda and the huge eye, to brand them with divine sense. Then, cultivators sent by Bai Lin would take the pills away to be stored for distribution when the big battle came. The reason the pills were branded with divine sense was so that Bai Xiaochun would get some battle credit when they were used in the fighting. He wouldn't get all the credit for each pill, but rather 30%. That was the agreement he and Bai Lin had come to. As for Bai Lin, since he was the financial backer of the pill, and also a general, he also received a small cut of all battle credit earned by the skinflayers. As for pills which ended up being used by the other 4 legions, Bai Lin would get a 30% cut. The fact that everyone was profiting handsomely was quite pleasing to both Bai Lin and Bai Xiaochun. Bai Lin was already very protective of the soul convergence pills, and had even sent a contingent of men over to stand guard over the armory. A large number of soul convergence pills were created during those 2 months, and at the same time, Bai Xiaochun still managed to set aside plenty of time for cultivation. Although he currently wasn't making much in terms of battle credit, with all of the medicinal plants that had been delivered by the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, his cultivation went on as normal. His frigid chi continued to grow stronger, and he was getting closer and closer to the great circle of the gold core stage. However, his most rapid area of advancement was with his undying live forever technique. With so many earth spirit tubers at his disposal, all of them hundreds of years old, he had a shocking amount of life force to work with. As such, his entire left arm was now filled with undying tendons, and he was reaching the point of completion with his right arm. Bai Xiaochun munched on earth spirit tubers the way a rabbit would munch on carrots on a daily basis. He even tended to nibble a bit here and there when concocting medicine. After another 10 days passed, rumbling sounds echoed out into the evening sky as Bai Xiaochun's right arm came to be fully filled with undying tendons. Everything down to his fingers throbbed with shocking power, and when he shot his right arm out with full speed in the form of a fist, cracking sounds filled the air. Even more strangely, when he clenched his hand into a fist, it almost felt like he was grasping onto the fabric of space itself, and that by moving his hand, he could twist the air around him. Looking down excitedly at his arms, he said, "I've finished cultivating both arms and both legs." He could sense that his arms were now filled with incredible power and speed. This place is more of a holy land than the Bloodstream sect was. Bai Xiaochun was extremely excited. After all, the undying live forever technique was a huge drain on resources, and that trend only grew more pronounced the more one cultivated the technique. Without the chance occurrences that had led him to large amounts of resources, he would never have been able to cultivate it to its current level. Before, he had been in the late gold core stage, but only had undying tendons in one of his legs. But now, thanks to the indescribably valuable earth spirit tubers, he had advanced by leaps and bounds. Of course, one thing that Bai Xiaochun didn't know was that the amount of earth spirit tubers he had consumed so far was actually more than half of the available reserves for the entire Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, reserves that had been built up over the course of many years. After all, few people in the cultivation world raised earth spirit tubers, which were fundamentally hard to grow. Most of them existed in arcane pocket realms, and only transformed into medicinal plants after having grown for 100 years. Now the only parts left are my torso and head. At this rate, it should only be a few more years before I succeed completely with my undying tendons. At that point, I should be able to break through the third shackle. The more he thought about it, the more excited he got. After experimenting a bit more with his newfound power, he looked up proudly and mused about the fact that if he had a match with eldest brother Zhao Tianzhao, he would actually have a chance at victory. I wish I could find a nascent soul expert to fight. However, after a moment passed, he realized that such an idea didn't make much sense, and quickly changed his mind. Clearing his throat, he murmured, "No need to be so impulsive." With that, he took a moment to readjust his thinking, then went back to cultivation. Another month went by. One day, when Bai Xiaochun was in the middle of meditating, he suddenly heard what sounded like a war drum being beaten outside. The thunderous sound filled the entire city, and caused many cultivators to rush out and look up into the sky. Zhao Long and the others were in the middle of watching over the pill furnaces in the courtyard when they heard the war drum, and their expressions instantly flickered. The 10 nascent soul cultivators also opened their eyes and looked up in the direction of the tower and the eye. That eye was where the sound of the war drum was coming from. The drum of the celestial warrior. We haven't heard the drum of the celestial warrior for a long time. Whenever that drum sounds, it means that an army of savages larger than 500,000 strong is coming. Even as the cries of alarm rose up, the beating of the drum caused the blood within the veins of the cultivators to flow more swiftly than before, Bai Xiaochun included. The sound of the drum filled them with a desire to fight, and caused their bones and blood to vibrate. The sound even caused their cultivation bases to grow slightly more powerful. That was the power of the drum of the celestial warrior. Furthermore, there were additional benefits. All of the cultivators in Great Wall City found that they had begun to glow with a faint violet light. That light was a type of armor that made their defenses stronger, and gave them a slight boost to agility. Moments later, bugles began to sound, filling the city and drawing the attention of all cultivators of the 5 legions, no matter what they were doing. Bai Xiaochun walked out of his room to find that Bai Lin was flying over toward him at top speed. A moment later, he came to a stop up in midair, his expression serious as he looked down at Bai Xiaochun. The Wildlands has sent an almighty Diva realm expert, along with more than 100 necromancers, 1,000 soul cultivators, and 100 savage tribes with 700,000 giants. There are also innumerable beasts and souls. This is the major attack we've been waiting for. Bai Xiaochun shivered. Despite having been prepared for this moment, the news was still shocking. The Diva Patriarch has sent down orders that all cultivators in the city should prepare for battle. This is going to be the biggest fight we've had in years. Bai Xiaochun, I'll be very busy commanding the army, and won't have time to watch out for you. Make sure to take care of yourself in the coming battle. With that, Bai Lin looked over at the 10 huge pill furnaces. Although they were radiating intense heat, they had not yet reached the point of detonation. Unfortunately, there was nothing else that could be done. Bai Lin nodded at the 10 nascent soul cultivators, who joined him as he flew off toward the wall. Zhao Long and the rest of the battalion were already getting into their armor, and from their expressions, they hungered to do battle. Ever since they had become Bai Xiaochun's followers, they hadn't gone out to fight on the battlefield. Now, with the drum of the celestial warrior tugging at their hearts, their killing intent was burning hot, and their eyes were shining with the red light could only be seen among warrior cultivators from Great Wall City. Bai Xiaochun looked around quietly at Zhao Long, Lu Li, and all of the other soldiers under his command. After a moment, he patted his bag of holding to produce numerous sets of armor, sundry magical items, countless bottles of medicinal pills, and stacks upon stacks of paper talismans. Although he didn't have so many items that they could be referred to as endless, he definitely had enough to equip more than 1,000 soldiers for battle. Without any hesitation, he sent the items flying out to Zhao Long and the other 100 cultivators in the battalion. "I'm your captain, and you fight under my banner," he said. "Although I haven't given you much in the way of rewards up to this point, I've long since prepared for this battle. These magical items, medicinal pills, and paper talismans are for you. One suit of armor isn't enough, so I've prepared multiple sets for all of you. Make sure you're well covered. Ideally, all of you should make sure to wear your spirit helmets at all times. In terms of magical items, I've prepared more than 20 for each of you. Even if you just use them for the force they unleash when detonated, at least you'll be able to take down more of the enemy. As we all know, you should never allow yourself to run low on medicinal pills, especially not in the middle of a battle. Therefore, I've prepared all sorts of pills for you, including pills to replenish your cultivation base, to heal injuries, and even some poison pills. Remember, when you go out into battle, you represent me, Bai Xiaochun. Furthermore, I've personally prepared a set of 100 soul convergence pills for each of you. As for orders for battle, I only have one. As you go about killing the enemy, please, you absolutely must make sure to keep yourselves alive. Bai Xiaochun's voice quavered a bit by the end of his speech. Waving his sleeve, he sent numerous bottles of soul convergence pills flying out to Zhao Long and the rest of the battalion. Everyone was stunned, and soon, their eyes brimmed with gratitude. All of them knew that the things Bai Xiaochun was giving them had been purchased with his own battle credit. Furthermore, everything was high quality, and would give them a clear advantage among anyone of the same cultivation level as them. With that, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and unleashed his murderous aura. Eyes glinting, veins of steel pulsing, he turned into a beam of light as he led his battalion up to the Great Wall. Let's go. Before Bai Xiaochun and his battalion could even reach the Great Wall, a blood-colored cloud suddenly appeared on the horizon, spreading out with incredible speed. Within the blood-red cloud were countless vengeful souls that looked quite different from the ordinary type. These souls were crimson, and seemed to contain something boundlessly evil. As they neared, the souls began to clump together into the shape of a head, fully 9,000 meters tall. It was the face of a young woman, complete with long, flowing hair and eyes that sparkled with sinister coldness. Astonishingly, that head radiated an energy that seemed capable of rocking both heaven and earth. Standing on the very top of the head was a young woman in a crimson garment, who was barely visible within the cloud. Although it was impossible to make out her features clearly, she radiated an aura that seemed to fuse with heaven and earth. The scene playing out was completely and utterly shocking. Chen Hichan, the young woman cried in a voice that wasn't loud, and yet echoed out in bizarre fashion, completely disregarding Great Wall City's spell formation to fill the entire city. Anyone who heard the voice would sense their mind spinning, and would feel as if they were drowning in a sea of blood. Virtually all of the cultivators of the 5 legions, including the ones inside the city, couldn't help but scream in response. Bai Xiaochun was leading his 100-man battalion up to the wall when the sound hit them all. His subordinates immediately found blood oozing out of their eyes, ears, noses, and mouths, and began to shriek in fear. Bai Xiaochun also began to tremble. It felt like 2 daggers were stabbing into his ears, and it was only because of the Heaven Dao aura within his gold core that he was mostly unscathed by the sound. Ah diva! Bai Xiaochun gasped. At the same moment, the eye atop the enormous pagoda in the middle of the city suddenly cast bright light out. Although it wasn't the dead of night at the moment, the sky was dark, casting all the lands into murkiness. Therefore, when the huge eye began to shine brightly, it made it look like a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering sun. As the light spread out, the cultivators in Great Wall City and on the wall itself quickly recovered from the effects of the deafening noise, which was rapidly driven out past the shield. Suddenly, an old man appeared within the huge eye, flashing through the air to appear high above Great Wall City. The instant he appeared, a ghost image sprang up resembling the entire city, which vanished moments later as he stepped out beyond the wall. Back down, red dust, you she-devil. That old man was none other than Chen Yushan's father and Zhao Tianzhao's master, Chen Hichan. He wore a long white robe, had a third eye on his forehead, and just like the young woman in red, seemed connected to both heaven and earth. Rumbling sounds echoed out as these 2 shocking forces appeared out in the open. In the blink of an eye, Chen Hichan had reached the blood cloud, and vanished inside. Moments later, muffled rumbles like the crash of thunder echoed out from inside, and the cloud itself began to churn and seethe. Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but gasp at the sight. Clearly, that young woman was a diva from the wildlands, and the battle she was fighting with Chen Hichan was beyond that which ordinary cultivators could participate in. Moments later, Bai Xiaochun and the rest of his battalion recovered, and proceeded up to the Great Wall. The first thing they heard upon arriving were the booms and screams of the combat going on beyond the wall. There were more than 700,000 savages from over 100 tribes out there, a mighty force that was so awe-inspiring that Bai Xiaochun's eyes went as wide as saucers upon seeing them. So many vengeful souls were gathered that it was impossible to see the end of them. Within their midst were the giants, who were equally innumerable. Based on the slight differences between them, these giants were clearly from more than 100 different tribes, and interspersed among them as they charged toward the wall were numerous vicious beasts. The lands quaked because of their passage, and even the Great Wall itself seemed to be swaying back and forth. And that was just the land. Up in the sky were even more giants and vengeful souls, screaming through the air along with thousands of soul cultivators. Among those soul cultivators could be seen both men and women, all of them good-looking, but with cold expressions. They were people who could attack with vicious power, and at the same time, could control the savages among whom they were scattered. Further off in the distance were even more powerful figures who were guarded closely by even more soul cultivators. Necromancers. Most of the necromancers wore dark robes, and with the single wave of a hand would send countless vengeful souls screaming out in front of them in devastating attacks. Even further off in the distance were 5 black altars hovering in midair. Black beams of light shot out from the 5 altars, connecting together in a pentagram-like ceiling pattern. High up in the sky, the pentagram split the air and cracked it open, allowing numerous ghostly hands to stretch out from beyond, accompanied by cackling screams. Atop each altar was a wrinkled old man in a black robe, all of whom were chanting scriptures that caused the rifts overhead to widen. Those were merely the things Bai Xiaochun could see with his own eyes. The army was so huge that it was impossible to even see where it ended. The vast size of the army left Bai Xiaochun wondering if the Great Wall forces could even hold out against it. As he looked around, he could see various expressions on the faces of the cultivators of the 5 legions. However, none of them were expressions of fear, as if this enormous army were nothing out of the ordinary. It didn't take long for the Great Wall's shield to begin to ripple and distort, and then slowly begin to advance forward onto the battlefield. At the same time, the cultivators of the 5 legions began to break up into groups and charge forward to fight. At that point, Bai Xiaochun received orders from the colonel who was his commanding officer, instructing him to lead his troops into the fight. As the shield advanced across the battlefield, the forces of the Great Wall began to engage in close quarters fighting with the wildlanders. The savage giants were the least difficult of the enemy forces to deal with, considering that they weren't very numerous. The vengeful souls which surrounded them didn't fear being destroyed, and had always been the most troublesome. However, that was before Bai Xiaochun came to the Great Wall. As of this moment, it was to Bai Xiaochun's surprise that cultivators of the 5 legions were already tossing out soul convergence pills into the fight. Soon, the booms of exploding soul convergence pill filled the air, as well as the shrieking of the vengeful souls who were sucked together in one place, and those who were destroyed in the secondary blast. Not only were the vengeful souls affected in devastating fashion, but the savage giants were also injured by the explosions, and were sent staggering backward with blood spraying out of their mouths. Even just one soul convergence pill was powerful on its own, but to have more than 1,000 exploding at the same time struck terror into the hearts of the wildlands forces. Thus, the 5 legions were able to advance slowly but surely across the battlefield. In addition, the several thousand elite cultivators of the 5 legions were specifically targeting the soul cultivators and engaging them in deadly duels. The sounds of fierce fighting filled the battlefield, and although everything seemed chaotic on the surface, the truth was that the Great Wall forces had the advantage, both because of their shield and because of the soul convergence pills. As the shield inched across the battlefield, the 5 legions followed along, forcing the wildlands savages to either retreat, or get stuck inside the shield to fight the cultivators, and eventually be cut down. Furthermore, because of how the cultivators of the 5 legions were well disciplined and frequently rotated their forces up to the front lines and back, there were few casualties. It was really a terrifying situation for the enemy. It was the same on the ground and up in the air as well. As for the huge eye atop the pagoda, its gaze swept across the battlefield, killing giants and decimating vengeful souls, hewing furrows into the earth and sending powerful ripples through the sky. Although the 100 wildlander tribes vastly outnumbered the 5 legions, they were as disorganized as a plate of loose sand. Normally speaking, the 5 legions would never have such an advantage. Considering how things normally went during such battles, the vengeful souls would always cause a huge headache for them, and also provide a powerful measure of defense for the wildlanders. Usually, the charge of the vengeful souls would prevent the Great Wall's shield from advancing across the battlefield, and could even push it back or threaten to break it. After all, the attack of such a vast number of vengeful souls was difficult to even describe. Although a single soul couldn't do much to the spell formation shield, masses of them together were terrifying. But now, as soon as that tide of souls got close to the 5 legions, soul convergence pills were unleashed, instantly hewing out enormous spaces that were completely free of vengeful souls. Furthermore, the explosions would also injure the savages. It was almost as if the Wildlands army had been grabbed by its figurative neck and was being shoved backward. Damn it, how come they have so many of those pills? This is impossible. I thought the Great Wall only used pill furnaces. What kind of medicinal pill is that? I remember something like this happening once, but that was a single pill. Damn it, they're throwing out thousands of them. How do we fight back against this? The fury of the tribal chiefs rose high into the heavens, and even the soul cultivators were left frowning. As for the esteemed necromancers, of which there were only a few more than 100, all they could do was force the vengeful souls to attack in an attempt to somehow reverse the situation. Unfortunately for them, that was no simple task. This is all the doing of that Bai Xiaochun. Damn it, if we don't get rid of him, our wildlands forces are going to suffer a huge loss. Numerous hateful gazes were cast toward the Great Wall from the tribal chiefs and the necromancers. All of that made Bai Xiaochun quite nervous, and he even backed up a few steps in his position on top of the wall, worried that there might be another assassination attempt. Down on the battlefield, Zhao Long and the rest of the battalion were engaged in fierce fighting. Compared to the 5 legions as a whole, Bai Xiaochun's battalion wasn't very large. However, they stuck out quite a bit. After all, they all wore multiple layers of armor, and when they attacked, they destroyed their opponents as easily as a boulder crushing a drinking glass. In moments of danger, they would toss out vast quantities of soul convergence pills, to the point where the other cultivators of the 5 legions were looking over at them enviously. Most over the top was how they wouldn't hesitate to detonate their own magical items to defend themselves. Even some of the colonels in the army noticed what was happening. Whose men are those? Heavens! Look at how many soul convergence pills they're using. How do they have so many? And the magical items? I just saw them blow up 6 at the same time. Those things are expensive. That's nothing. Look at how much armor they're wearing. 5 or 6 layers at least. They don't even get hurt when the savage giants self-detonate. The performance of Zhao Long and the rest of the battalion couldn't have been more eye-catching, and the numbers of vengeful souls and savages that they cut down far exceeded any of the other cultivators. Nothing could stand in their way as they fought their way across the battlefield. Keep it up, guys, Bai Xiaochun shouted excitedly. Turning to some of the soldiers manning positions on the wall near him, he proudly said, "Those are my men. What do you think? Pretty awesome, huh?" The other cultivators were left speechless by how well equipped Bai Xiaochun's battalion was. Many of them even looked over at Bai Xiaochun and sighed in envy. They're not skin flayers, they've obviously become Grandmaster Bai's personal retinue. It was in that very moment that something like a sudden clap of thunder rang out in the distance. Bai Lin and the other leaders of the army were clearly startled, and as for Bai Xiaochun, his heart leapt in fear. Everyone looked over to see the clouds parting off in the distance as a river appeared. The river was so wide it was almost like a sea, and was pitch black in color. Within those waters could be seen countless vengeful souls, all of them howling as they attempted to break free from the water. However, none of them seemed capable of doing so, and were swept away with the current. "Underworld River," someone shouted in alarm. Bai Xiaochun immediately backed up a bit more, looking up wide-eyed at the huge underworld river. Moments later, an enormous hand suddenly appeared next to the flowing waters of the underworld river. Instantly, incredible pressure erupted out, causing the Great Wall's spell formation shield to tremble. Even Chen Hichan, who was in the middle of battling the red-garbed young woman, was shocked by what was happening. Next, the huge hand began to chop down like a blade, slashing into the underworld river, causing intense, mind-numbing rumbling sounds to fill the air. Rumble. It was with a deafening roar that the underworld river was ripped open, creating something like a tributary that poured out in the direction of Great Wall City. The gap that had been opened up began to close, but couldn't prevent a massive number of vengeful soul from pouring out. Black underworld river water rushed through the air toward the battlefield and the Great Wall shield. Some of the savage giants weren't quick enough to react, and were swept up by the water. Screaming, they were dissolved away, instantly becoming part of the river itself. Although all of this takes a bit of time to describe, it happened so quickly that before anyone could react, the countless vengeful soul from the underworld river had reached the Great Wall's shield. A huge boom echoed out as the shield trembled in unprecedented fashion, and rapidly began to weaken. As the shield weakened, it shrank back, forcing the cultivators of the 5 legions to retreat. Bai Xiaochun immediately began to get nervous. As for Bai Lin, when he saw what was happening, he roared, "Everyone, toss out your soul convergence pills. I refuse to believe these vengeful souls can't be vanquished." The cultivators of the 5 legions gritted their teeth and began to toss out soul convergence pills as they backed up. It took only the briefest of moments for the sky to fill with countless medicinal pills. The pills were designed to affect the souls, not the waters of the underworld river, and yet, they were still partially effective. Furthermore, there were so many of them that when they exploded, they transformed into numerous whirlpools within the underworld river. Instantly, those whirlpools began to absorb the nearby vengeful souls, and at the same time, began to merge together with each other as they grew. Soon, one gigantic whirlpool could be seen in the underworld river, which sucked in a massive amount of soul bodies before it trembled and then detonated. The blast spread out, sending underworld river water splashing out in all directions, along with countless miserable shrieks. Although the Great Wall's shield had been weakened, the cultivators of the 5 legions still had the advantage. The underworld river began to fade away, and the gap that had been opened up in it had already closed up. Apparently, the hand which had opened the gap could only do so once. Countless vengeful souls on the battlefield had been destroyed, and the ones which remained behind had been thrown into such chaos that the necromancers couldn't control them, and some even began to flee or attack the wildlanders. It was the perfect opportunity for the 5 legions to make their move. Without the slightest hesitation, Bai Lin sent out orders to counterattack. The shield once again began to advance, the cultivators of the 5 legions moving with it. Zhao Long and the other members of Bai Xiaochun's battalion were like razor-sharp blades that slashed through the enemy with reckless abandon. In response to everything which had just occurred, Bai Xiaochun frowned. Even he hadn't been aware that the detonation of his soul convergence pills could be so devastatingly effective. Weird, he thought, blinking a few times. I never thought they would be so powerful. He could also see numerous leaders among the savage giants glaring at him in hatred. If looks could kill, then he would definitely have been chopped to pieces and boiled to death on the spot. For the first time, Bai Xiaochun actually felt a bit guilty. At the same time, he felt more in danger than ever. Sadly, they were just on different sides, and there was nothing he could do about it. As Bai Xiaochun's anxiety mounted, the twists and turns in the battle down below caused the red-garbed young woman fighting Chen Hichan to frown. However, the intensity of the fight she was participating in ensured that she didn't have much attention to spare. The blood clouds surrounding her seethed, and rifts snaked out into the sky as a result of the attacks being unleashed. As the cracking sounds rang out above, some of the rifts even reached down to the ground, almost like lightning bolts that caused huge explosions when they touched the soil. Bai Xiaochun's scalp prickled in fear as he watched one of those rifts hit a soul cultivator who was comparable to the nascent soul stage. As soon as the rift touched him, he was ripped to shreds, destroyed in body and soul. Diva, he breathed. This was his first time witnessing the true power of devas, and it left his mind reeling. The level of power on display far surpassed that which a human body could handle. It was something completely beyond what ordinary cultivators were capable of dealing with. Merge oneself with heaven and earth, he murmured, and borrow their boundless might. From his perspective, everything around Chen Hichan and the red-garbed young woman became weapons to use at their disposal, whether it was the wind, or the clouds, or other things. Anything in heaven and earth could be used like divine abilities. There were also illusory forms which took shape around them, figures from ancient times which began to battle each other. Thankfully, the Great Wall still had the overall advantage in the battle. The cultivators of the 5 legions continued to advance, and the tide of souls was pushed away. Without the vengeful souls to protect them, the army of 700,000 savage giants had to fight the 5 legions directly, and were suffering one setback after another. Bai Xiaochun felt quite relieved because of that. After all, despite having participated in quite a few wars, this was definitely the largest one he had ever been part of. However, in the exact moment in which Bai Xiaochun breathed a sigh of relief, the over 100 necromancers among the Wildlands forces suddenly looked up. Because of how the necromancers had just lost control of the vengeful souls, that meant that they now had attention to spare. One by one, they began to settle down cross-legged, after which they pulled out black sticks of incense, the smoke of which they inhaled deeply, causing them to instantly slip into deep trances. Moments later, even as large groups of soul cultivators approached to guard them, shadowy figures appeared above the heads of the necromancers. They were the necromancers' own souls, which emanated shocking auras as they then shot toward the Great Wall's shield. Although the shield could keep most wildlanders out, with the help of the incense they had just inhaled, the necromancers could now pass through it. This was almost the same thing which had occurred during the assassination attempt on Bai Xiaochun. As soon as Bai Xiaochun saw the souls flying out of the necromancers, he backed up again. As he did, the souls became beams of light that shot forth and pierced through the Great Wall's shield. Without hesitation, the 5 generals of the various legions, Bai Lin included, flew forth to meet the necromancer souls in battle, followed by the various major generals of the armies. The souls of the necromancers were thus prevented from reaching the Great Wall itself. Furthermore, the huge eye also began to shoot out terrifying, destructive beams of light. At the same time, the savage giants received new orders from their tribal chiefs. Eyes turning red, they howled and began to charge toward the Great Wall, disregarding all danger to themselves. Booms rang out as they began to self-detonate, throwing themselves fearlessly at the shield, which began to distort and weaken once again. The Wildlanders were making a major offensive. Tens of thousands of giants blew themselves up, instantly shoving the shield backward across the battlefield. Many of the cultivators of the 5 legions who weren't quick to react were caught up in the explosions and died screaming. However, such screams paled in comparison to the screams of the cultivators who the giants managed to grab a hold of. Bai Xiaochun's face went pale when the sounds reached his ears. He even personally watched as 2 of the giants ripped a cultivator in half and began to eat him alive. As a result, both giants clearly began to head toward a cultivation base breakthrough. The savages also practiced cultivation, but instead of using spiritual energy, they absorbed soul power. However, that didn't mean that they didn't desire to absorb spiritual energy. In fact, they found spiritual energy to be delicious. Eat them. It's been a long time since I dined on a cultivator. Ha ha ha. Now that's the flavor I'm talking about. The savage giants charged forward with madness, grabbing any cultivators they could get their hands on and devouring them as ravenously as wild beasts. Some of them continued to self-detonate, explosions which not only weakened the shield, but also completely destroyed any cultivators unlucky enough to get caught up in them. Bai Xiaochun's ashen face began to flush in response to what he was witnessing. Although he had heard that the savages ate human flesh, this was his first time seeing it actually happen. Now is not the time to fear death, he growled through gritted teeth. Although he had felt a bit guilty earlier because of his soul convergence pills, now that he saw the brutality of the wildlanders on full display, his heart suddenly turned cold and grim. After a moment of silence, he spun and shot back down to Great Wall City, transforming into a beam of bright light that headed directly toward the armory. Back in the armory, numerous pill furnaces were set up in concentric rings. Although the 10 300-meter-tall furnaces weren't being attended by the nascent soul cultivators anymore, they were still bright red, and were emanating intense heat waves. Bai Xiaochun quickly examined the 10 huge pill furnaces, then took a deep breath and waved his sleeve. In response, all of the huge furnaces rumbled up into midair and then began to circulate around Bai Xiaochun. Then, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing numerous sealing marks to fly out to the furnaces, backed by the power of his gold core and filled with a Heaven Dao aura. As they sank into the pill furnaces, muffled sounds like thunder began to echo out. Although the huge pill furnaces had not quite reached the point of detonation yet, Bai Xiaochun was a skilled apothecary, and naturally had his ways of forcing them to explode early. By relying on the external power of the sealing marks he had just unleashed, he could prematurely destabilize the medicine within the furnaces. Although the resulting detonation would be slightly less effective, a huge amount of power had already built up in the furnaces during the past several days. Having placed his sealing marks onto the furnaces, he shot back up toward the Great Wall, furnaces in tow. When he returned, quite a few cultivators of the 5 legions noticed him, as did many of the wildlands savages. After all, the 300-meter-tall furnaces were completely eye-catching, especially considering that they were all bright red, and emanated shocking fluctuations. Those are Grandmaster Bai's pill furnaces. Expressions of excitement and profound anticipation appeared on the faces of the cultivators of the 5 legions. Similar expressions could be seen on the faces of the generals and major generals who were fighting the necromancer souls, especially Bai Lin. As for the faces of the necromancer souls, they flickered with shock, and the wildlands savages gasped. The tribal chiefs were especially astonished. They're so huge. Heavens! Before anyone could recover from their shock, Bai Xiaochun flew up into the air above the Great Wall, howling as he hurled the 10 enormous furnaces out over the battlefield. They were like 10 burning suns that pierced through the air, sailing right into the army of countless savages. In that instant, the entire battlefield went quiet, and all eyes came to be fixed onto the burning, sun-like pill furnaces. The chiefs of the more than 100 wildlands tribes were all completely shaken. During the course of previous skirmishes, the power of the exploding pill furnaces they had seen left them completely shocked. Now, the sheer size of the furnaces they were looking at left them incapable of even breathing. They're so huge. If those 10 furnaces explode. The chiefs' eyes went wide as their hearts were slammed by waves of shock. And they weren't the only ones. Upon seeing the furnaces, the tens of thousands of madly charging giants were suddenly overwhelmed by painful memories. Devil Bai! Damn it, it's that Devil Bai! In their terror, countless numbers of giants tried to retreat. Devil Bai was the nickname the wildlands tribes had given to Bai Xiaochun after the appalling scenes of devastation he had wreaked upon them. Not even Bai Xiaochun was aware that he had been given that nickname, and yet, it was already widely known in the wildlands. In that moment in which all eyes were locked on the pill furnaces, a shrill cry suddenly rang out from within the wildlands forces. Pay any price to lock down those pill furnaces. Instantly, numerous soul cultivators and tribal chiefs all drew upon the full power of their cultivation bases to summon a massive, all-encompassing net. The net shot across the battlefield with incredible speed, and in the blink of an eye, had reached the pill furnaces. Although the net managed to block some of the furnaces were moving so quickly that 4 of them managed to slam into the ground, instantly crushing the giants who had been too slow to evade them. As soon as they touched the ground, a deafening boom rang out that could shake heaven and earth, a sound that surpassed everything else on the battlefield, a sound that rose to the highest heavens and the furthest reaches of the earth. As the first of the 300-meter-tall pill furnaces filled with cracks and exploded, lands shook and mountains were rocked. It was like the end of days as a blue sea of flames erupted out from the location of the pill furnace, instantly spreading out to fill an area 10 of thousands of meters across. Wherever the blue flames passed, agonized shrieks rose up as the giants were incinerated. In addition to the flames, the shrapnel from the furnace itself became meteoric blades of flame that slashed through everything in their path. And things weren't over yet. There was also a shockwave which spread out, picking up the burning giants and hurling them violently across the battlefield. The boom of the explosion made it seem like heavenly lightning was crashing into the earth in an unceasing waterfall. Simultaneously, tendrils of 5-colored smoke spread out rapidly, boring into the bodies of the giants, provoking blood-curdling screams as the giants' flesh began to rot and decay. Others amongst the giants were seemingly struck senseless, and simply stood there unmoving as the flames burned them away. And yet, things still weren't over. The second pill furnace cracked and exploded, then the third and the fourth. One by one, massive explosions ripped across the battlefield, filling an area 300,000 meters across, and transforming it into little more than rubble. And that was only 4 of the pill furnaces. The other 6 had been wrapped up by the huge net and sealed. Even still, the explosion of those 4 pill furnaces was a devastating blow to the wildlanders. Vast numbers of giants were burned alive. Meteor-like shrapnel pierced bodies left and right, and the shockwave sent countless savages tumbling across the battlefield. Most calamitous of all was the 5-colored smoke. That smoke didn't leave a single living thing in its wake. It was the result of countless types of mystery pills whose medicinal effects touched the savages in ways that not even Bai Xiaochun could have anticipated. Agonized shrieks continued to ring out as blood sprayed out of the mouths of the soul cultivators, many of whom were sent tumbling backwards. Furthermore, those 4 pill furnaces had not only killed countless savages, but they had also wreaked incalculable damage on the survivors. Those surviving giants had their will to fight destroyed. Their determination was cut away, and as they backed away, their eyes were filled with fear, astonishment, and utter incredulity. Devil! Devil! Bai! Chaotic cries of alarm began to ring out, as if they were the only way to dispel the terror felt in the hearts of the wildlanders. When their horrified gazes turned toward Bai Xiaochun on the Great Wall, he could sense how fearful they were. Actually, it wasn't just the savage giants who were reacting in such a way. As of this point, many of the cultivators of the 5 legions had forgotten to breathe, and were looking over at Bai Xiaochun with looks of extreme reverence and awe. He had created the original exploding pill furnaces, and he had concocted the soul convergence pills. As for the supernova-like detonations just now, they had also originated with him. He had crushed the enemy with impunity over and over again, to the point where every last individual among the 5 legions knew his name. As the effects of the explosion began to fade away, it became clear that the space in front of the 5 legions on the battlefield was almost completely empty. There were only 4 enormous craters, and 6 ruined furnaces that had not exploded. The battlefield was almost completely silent, the only sounds to be heard coming from the Diva battle, and the fighting of the souls of the necromancers against Bai Lin and the other leaders of the armies. Everyone else on the battlefield was simply staring in complete and utter shock. Further off in the distance were the 5 altars in pentagram form and the black beams of light. The black-robed old men sitting there chanting scriptures were trembling as they looked out at the battlefield. Then they glanced up at the devas fighting, and then looked silently over at Bai Xiaochun standing on the Great Wall. Despite how far away they were, it was almost as if he were standing right in front of them. Currently, Bai Xiaochun was staring with gaping jaw at the battlefield. After a moment passed, he remembered to breathe, after which, his heart began to thump in fear. At the same time, he realized that his battle credit was rising at shocking speed. At this rate, I'm definitely going to be promoted to colonel. Even as his heart began to swell with excitement, a gaze was suddenly leveled upon him from within the blood cloud. At the same time, a stream of blood mist shot out in his direction. It was none other than an attack by the Diva realm young woman in red clothing. However, there was no way Chen Hichan would simply allow that to happen. Laughing loudly, he blocked the attack, and then, the fighting between the two of them resumed at even more intense levels. At first, Bai Xiaochun was startled, but seeing that the attack couldn't reach him, he sighed in relief. However, before even half of that sigh could escape his lips, more gazes fell upon him from within the Wildlands army. Those gazes came from the numerous tribal chiefs, all of whom were now staring fixedly at Bai Xiaochun. The ferocity and madness in those gazes completely surpassed anything from before. What are they all looking at me for? Well, I think my work is done here anyway. This place is way too dangerous now. I'll just head off the wall. Having made his decision, he was just about to leave when, all of a sudden, a howl rippled through the air that seemed intense enough to shred the heavens. As it did, the rifts which had previously opened up in the heavens were completely ripped open, creating a pentagram-shaped hole. Muffled cries could then be heard. Hungry, so hungry. At the same time, one terrifying ghost hand after another stretched out, which quickly grabbed the black-robed old men and dragged them up into the rifts. The old men didn't resist at all. They simply allowed the ghost hands to drag them up, whereupon sickening crunching sounds echoed out. That strange scene instantly caused the cultivators of the 5 legions to stare in shock, and threw their breathing into chaos. As for Bai Xiaochun, his eyes went wide as he looked at the pentagram-shaped opening up in the sky, a bad feeling rising up in his heart. Even as he began to race backward toward the city, an incredible rumbling sound erupted from the pentagram, revealing a gargantuan mouth. Apparently, that mouth existed in some location beyond the heavens, and was so huge that the opening could only reveal part of it. It was greenish, with black teeth that were stained with blood and gore. Almost as soon as that mouth appeared, more words could be heard. Hungry, so hungry. Even as everyone was shaken, the mouth shifted to face the direction of the Great Wall and then began to inhale deeply. Heaven and earth dimmed, and everything began to shake as an indescribable gravitational force erupted from the mouth. Not even the spell formation shield could do anything to stop it, and within moments, many of the cultivators of the 5 legions were shocked to find themselves flying up into the air, their bodies completely beyond their own control. Whooshing sounds could be heard as more than half of the 5 legions cultivators were suddenly sucked beyond the shield and toward the huge mouth. There were quite a few cultivators on the Great Wall itself who were affected, even Bai Xiaochun. Trembling, he found that he was completely incapable of retreating. A scream escaped his lips as he was sucked off of the Great Wall and out onto the battlefield beyond the shield. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.